Okay. Can you see my screen now? Yeah. Great. Yeah. Hello, everyone. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and also good night. So I'm happy to host this panel as moderator, past, present, and future of data storytelling. The organizer is me and also Yun Wang from Microsoft. So here's the agenda of our panel. We will spend 5 minutes to introduce the background of our panel and our very glad to have panelists. And the panelists will share their viewpoints. Then we'll have open discussions, and also we'll have Q&A sessions. So for our audiences, if you have any questions, just feel free to ask, and we'll try our best to answer all the questions if time permits. You can think now and then just put it on Slido or Discord, so we'll monitor it. And finally, we'll have a closing remark for our panelists to share their maybe opinions and viewpoints in one sentence to conclude our panel. As we all know, the storytelling is everywhere in our life. Here is a screenshot from Hans Rosling's famous data story, and he combines like the animation, the charts, and also his gestures to make such an engaging data story. In the past decades, to facilitating telling such appealing data stories, our researchers in our community and also some other communities like the HCI and journalism has really contributed many studies. They have contributed the theory, like the very early narrative visualization, the most telling story about how we can tell a story, and also we build lots of fascinating design spaces and tools to author them. And also we have automatic generation tools. And also here, as we can see, we have lots of tools that combines the power of human and also automation to make sure we can author stories both like in an expressive way and with like the minimum efforts. And most recently, we have witnessed an emergence of generative AI systems such as GPT models. They have really demonstrated their powers in boosting our research, such as they can generate some tests, they can turn static charts into real-life charts, and also they can make our charts more beautiful. They can involve some additional embellishment to our plain charts. So at this moment, we believe it is really important for us to reflect how our research achieves now and also have an outlook for future opportunities. That's why we are here to have this panel to discuss what are the remarkable breakthroughs and research challenges, and more importantly, what can we do in the future? And we want to identify some potential interesting issues and even roadmaps for our field in next 5 to 10 years. And to discuss these questions, we are very glad and honored to have our panelists, Professor Benjamin Buck from INRIA and University of Edinburgh, Professor Sheila Carpendale from Simon Fraser University, Professor Fanny Chevalier from University of Toronto, and lastly, Dr. Natalie Rich from Microsoft. So I know I cannot give you a warm welcome with the audiences because we're in a fully virtual mode, but I'm quite sure the audiences will like have a very interesting towards your positions. And finally, I would like to thank my co-organizer, Dr. Yun Wang from Microsoft. And because of some personal reasons, she cannot be here, and it will be moderated by me. So now let's move on to our second part. I just try not to be too long for the introduction. And now we'll have Dr. Benjamin Bach from INRIA and University of Edinburgh to share his viewpoint. Now I'll stop my sharing, and yeah, you can take over the control. Yeah.
Great. Thanks for the organization of this panel. Thanks for the invitation. And it's great to share the space with, can you see this? With Sheila, Natalie, and Fanny. So it's great. It's going to be nice. So for this question, for this panel, I thought I'm bringing my question, which is how can data-driven storytelling lead to action? And I'm asking this question because I've been recently working on projects, for example, to support peace building missions, to support NGOs and local peace builders, communities, governments in how to respond to conflict, for example. So we're looking at all sorts of data from documents, from social media, from wherever this data is coming from, and we're trying to build different tools that help communicate the data around that we have about conflicts to eventually inform how people can react to conflict and create sustainable peace. And I'm also super interested in sustainability and in climate action. So here you have a dashboard that NASA is currently developing at their visualization studio in Washington. So NASA wants to build these dashboards. They are on hyperwalls, so they're fairly large, to show the data that they have about Earth, kind of Earth observation data. And you can see they have lots of different measures. And again, in this case, the idea is to show what data is available, to get people to know the data, to tell stories about the data, to get people using the data, knowing the data, and eventually make some sort of decisions for their own lives. And what is interesting about these two use cases is that on the one side, they are representing sort of wicked problems, which means that there's not a single solution that solves all of these problems. There are many different people involved. We have lots of different goals. We have opinions, perspectives, emotions, and so on and so on. So there can be really political problems, as you have seen. On the other side, in these projects, what we also see is that there's a lot of big data. Large data sets about Earth observation set data, which is coming in from satellites every hour, I think. And there's multi-dimensional data, there's complex systems underlying these things, whether this is human conflict or this is climate change, and so on and so on. So the question really that I want to ask is, how can these two things fit together, right? How can we use storytelling in that sense to help solve wicked problems with the big data that we are having about many of these issues? So it's kind of thinking about big data storytelling, how this can work. And of course, you're gonna see that one story is not enough to solve this problem. It's not enough to tell us everything about the data or to help solve these wicked problems, to cater to all these different audiences that are part of solving the problem. So the amount of stories is not really solving anything, because we need to think about the structures between the stories. We need to think how they can fit into a wider framework, and how can we develop platforms, and how can we approach this from a perspective that makes action eventually possible, rather than just telling individual stories that kind of sit in their own niche and that sometimes contradict each other, and so on and so on. So what could we potentially do? And apologies for this shameless plug. We are one thing that we're thinking about what we could do is work on something that we call visualization atlases, which is a representation for a wider set of platforms we could potentially build. So these atlases, maybe you're familiar with them, the Atlas of Economic Complexity or Our World in Data. They try to collect stories and make data accessible in a more consistent way, and kind of balance explanation on one side with exploration on the other side. So there will be a talk tomorrow in the last session on visualization atlases, who presents our work on this, by Jinri. So please follow up with the talk if you're interested in more of this. Of course, we can also think about automatic storytelling and personal storytelling, and kind of trying to build question answering systems that can tell us a very, very bespoke and individual story that we want to know, or that's kind of answering our question. There has been some work here in this area. Another shameless plug is tomorrow, Friday, we have a paper how to embed sort of visualization literacy add into visualizations. And this could potentially work very well with stories. If you think that these stories are very complicated and you need complicated visualizations to make a complicated point, then you need to think how you communicate the visualization in the first place, and help people understand what the visualization is. I've also seen work in immersive environments, such as this NASA dashboard on top, but also mixed reality and physicalizations to engage people with data, with stories, which is kind of diverging a little bit from this very linear, temporally linear story into spatial stories, if you will. Again, something else that we're thinking about is how can we foster discourse and use stories and data visualizations as sort of a discourse platform to get different people and opinions together, to make these stories less passive, but make them more active. Again, we have a talk tomorrow on this discursive visualizations. But hey, to be a little bit more devil's advocate here, a little bit more provocative, I want to finish off with some provocations. Having worked in this field for a bit now, with everyone here in the panel actually is storytelling really working? Like, is anyone really watching and going through all these stories, looking at the visualizations, trying to understand what the text is saying? And if so, what do you think, people take away from these stories? Are they motivated to act? Do they really make data-driven decisions? Will they remember anything? We can't even measure success, I think, in storytelling. Is our research progress really dashboards and comics in a way? Is that what we can offer? And anyways, the general public, do they care about data or in any way, data and evidence anyway, or are they just making decisions and believing whatever they hear from elsewhere? And context that a comment that I sometimes hear is, isn't storytelling just pretty pictures, sometimes with music these days? So thanks. That's me.
Yeah, thank you for your really interesting sharing. I see lots of comments already on Discord. So next, yeah, we have Sheila. Thank you. Sheila, you haven't turned on your mic, so we can hear you.
Okay, sorry about that. I think
Yeah,
I'm there
great.
now.
We can hear you now.
Okay. Yes, I gave a longer talk about this, and I just picked a couple of things out of it to seed this panel with. But if people have heard the previous one, they're welcome to ask questions from then too. So the first point that I want to make, and my slides aren't advancing, even though they're on my own screen. Try this again. Okay, is that data stories are not new. We've had data stories for time immemorial. You know, all of our history and knowledge and culture and teaching and tracking of how to hunt and how to gather food and all of that was all passed down in stories, and actually very successfully for eons. And now people kind of interested about, like, in post-colonial investigations about, like, does this really work? And this is just one example from the two-eyed seeing literature, that the massive tides in the Bay of Fundy has been preserved as an oral record accurately for 3,400 years. So yes, but what has happened to us? All our knowledge is in, like, science and text, and why do we think of science, knowledge, and data as boring? What happened? How did we lose? I mean, stories were actually the most important part of cultures. Like, how have we lost this connection? Why do we think of this as boring? I think that there is something we can do about changing this and not belittling the data that is in it. I think it's important to actually keep it. I know I show this picture because it was the beginning for me of realizing that people who could make pictures and tell stories about their data actually had pretty profound thinking and understanding about their data, that there was actually a connection between the storytelling and the understanding. And that has actually led to all kinds of things, and work with other people on this panel. I think this slide is the main point that I want to make, and that's that for the last 500 years, since the invention of the printing press, actually storytelling and how to tell stories has been in the hands of the European patriarchy and power. And actually only certain types of stories have been considered the way one should tell a story. And we've lost all kinds of possibilities and variations. And I've been intentionally going around finding other types of variations. They don't all have to be action hero type stories. This one in the top right, the carrier bag, is one of my favorite. It actually comes from Ursula Le Guin. She explained how she likes to make collections of interesting, beautiful, useful nuggets that she then strings together to make great stories. And she's a well-renowned sci-fi writer. She tells great stories. And this is, I guess, another, in some ways, quite disparate point, that we talk now about AI, and it all comes from large language models, and it's all, I mean, to me, I think like, yes, of course, we're going to use all the tools that we can, and any tools are great to use, but we have to be careful because it's looking at its data is the language of everybody on the web. And actually, we are filled with all kinds of unconscious bias. So you don't have to like program that into AI. The data that it's using holds this. So we do have to be super careful about using it. And one of the things that we've kind of forgotten is that we can actually make much simpler models, data models that actually tell the stories. Like this is just an example when we were using SELES, which stands for Spatially Explicit Landscape Event Simulator, built by Andrew and Joseph Fall. And essentially the problem was how to find the small salmon streams. And in the rainforest, it was just like really hard to find them because there's so much overlapping growth that you don't actually see it very well. And basically we built a model, we had a terrain map, and you could look, like if we simulated one drop of water, you could look at the areas immediately surrounding it and thinking which one's the lowest. Well, that's the way it will flow, and simulate rainfall for hundreds of years, like, which is, this is a very simple AI, whatever algorithmic model. But it actually did produce us a map with reasonably accurate streams that were actually super useful in helping finding these salmon streams. So, but this has been the kind of data story that for some reason our community hasn't been interested in, and we can actually do lots more work like this. The other one that I think maybe some of you know already, we are still making data comics, and I do think that we can get people to read them. And we published this at Permafrost top conference up in the Yukon. And we've had all kinds of feedback from environmentalists who have been finding it, and people are looking at it and are reading it. And I think that making data comics about climate change. So one of the things that happens in our world is scientists don't have any trouble believing and understanding climate change because they're doing the science and they see it. But when it comes to, the news we get, they just take the high level points and they leave the evidence out. And then people feel like they have the option of belief or disbelief. So we want to bring in the science into the story, into an integral way in the story, hopefully keeping it interesting. So yeah, click on that link and go and read the whole story. And we explain to you about the concept of latent heat. So a little bit of physics in with your comics. And I think that's the last point that I was going to make for this talk. Yes. Okay, I will stop sharing somewhere here.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila, for the very nice sharing. So our next will be Fanny. Yeah, we can see you now. Yeah, great.
All right. Well, thank you for having me. It's indeed a pleasure to share this panel with all of the great people and colleagues that we have here. So here's our $1 million question. How do we tell great stories, right? I think everybody agrees in this panel. If you attend, as we share this panel, this is one question we've mulled over for several decades. And we already got some great insight from Benjamin and Sheila. Is it even worth telling those stories? Let me try to break this down, trying to answer this question. So I would like to suggest that we think about the separation between the story, which is what happens and who it happens to. This is the raw content that we talk about. Then we have the narrative, which is deciding on what to tell, from whose perspective, and in which order to tell it. That is basically the process of creating the raw content and deciding on the viewpoint and order. And then we have the medium we use for delivery. Are we telling the story through voice, using a movie, using a data comics, etc., etc.? And I think it's important to make this separation because we must distinguish really what is the content from what is the form. And in our context of data storytelling, well, data is part of the raw content, and it's only a very small slice of it. So as our great other panelists have pointed out earlier in an earlier paper, before telling the story, first you need the story. And if you start with data, data never comes alone. Data always has context, and the context creates that story. So there's very important background work that needs to happen to turn like data into like a story. And once we have a full understanding of all of this story, that's where we can start the process of narrating this story, deciding what part of the story you're going to tell and in which order. And so this is what I think is the art of storytelling, really constructing the tale, a compelling narrative that resonates with the audience. And in my opinion, there's not much specificity, I think, here compared to regular storytelling. The fact that we have data is just one more like raw material that we work with, formatted data, and then we extract and we do a narrative. And this is independent from the medium. So being able to tell a good tale is different from delivering that tale using the medium of your choice. Do I have compelling stories to tell? Yes. Can I make movies? No. Can I write a good book? I don't think so. Can I make a comic? I'm not Ji-Zong. I don't know how to draw pretty comics. So that whole other part has to do with harnessing the medium for delivering that tale, right? And I think the problem of the research we've had is that the community has primarily focused on that aspect, the medium, the craft of the medium. And the so-called genres that we had from early work, I think they are just like media. They're not genres. We don't say movies is a genre. We don't say books are genre. They are medium to tell a story, right? And we spent a great deal of time studying, like in the same fashion as filmmakers learn from great and bad movies, writers learn from great and bad books. We spent a lot of time studying great and not so great data stories. And we have plenty examples of different media that we've studied. Natalie and Farashte studied data videos and so many others as well. And yeah, they describe the techniques very much so, if you wish to make the analogy with filmmaking, as we would just like, study the camera framing or lighting in movie making. It's not about the story, it's about the technique to tell that story. And we have the same for the data comics. We learned a great deal of knowledge about how people arrange panels, what are the different patterns that they use to tell the data stories from the perspective of the data story genre. All of the three panelists, Sheila, Natalie, and Ben, have worked extensively on this topic. And I did my own share with Nicole, Zoya, and Leo on yet another media, data storytelling. So we looked there again at plenty of examples, looked at what people do and how they use the medium, and then derived some design principles and built a tool to make this. But what I'm trying to go with this is like, how we wasted our time really focusing on the medium as opposed to like, doing the hard work of like knowing how to tell a good tale with the data. And I think one of the artifacts of like all of this research has been really like, we created a lot of overfit authoring tool, I think, based on what people have done so far. And I rejoin what Sheila was telling earlier. Like if we just look at what people have done prior, we may just like, reinforce stereotypes, prescribe people too much in some existing styles. Think perhaps for a moment how unremarkable Citizen Kane from Orson Welles would be had he used the same camera style and lighting from his predecessors. And I think there's a danger creating these great tools that make life easier for people, but might just like, create all the same kind of things. So I think we should call for like, more better support for creativity to address this problem. And Sheila has done some work on that, Natalie as well, Ben as well, and myself. Sketching is a great input, device to tell things. When I tell my story, I use voice as the primary thing. I cannot, again, make books and so on. So I would tell my story. Most of us, if not all of us, are able to tell our story through voice. So maybe we should, expand our range of input medium so that we can tell the story. And maybe Gen AI could help us actually turn that with the medium of our choice. Natalie might have ideas on that. I don't know, we'll see in a second. And another provocative point, like, I mean, we're researchers. Are we data storytellers? Should we be the data storytellers? I don't know that in movie there's like a lot of filmmakers who do the research on filmmaking and vice versa. So who should tell these stories and who should actually tell the stories of other people? And I think we should perhaps spend some time thinking about the implications of that. It's easy for me to tell my story if it's not too sensible of a topic. It's much harder for me to tell your story. I need to do a lot of homework telling your story. And I need a lot of homework similarly to do the story of a collective amount of people as opposed to an individual. So there are plenty of things that we can try to think about how we can guide the narrator for that. And so to illustrate my point, scientists tell stories in a very scientific way. You may remember the animation from Titanic, where the scientists really animate how the Titanic came to sink. And that pretty much contrasts with the experience of the survivors. So I'll leave you with James Cameron's takes on this.
And the forward compartments start to flood. Now, as the water level rises, it spills over the watertight bulkheads, which unfortunately don't go any higher than E-deck.
Thank you for that fine forensic analysis, Mr. Bodine. Of course, the experience of it was somewhat different.
And that was it for me. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's come to the last panelist, Natalie. Yeah.
Very cool. Let's see.
Oh, we can see your whole screen. So, oh yeah, it's great.
Does that work?
Yeah,
Okay.
it works. Yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much. I'm the last of the viewpoint speaker. I'll try to refer back to some of the prior ones if I can. All right. So it's me and lots of pretty pictures, as Benjamin puts it, mostly from people in our team here and a lot of the Microsoft, sort of Copilot and all of these things. None of them I've actually made myself directly. All right, so I'm going to talk really about what I think is the future of storytelling. And then mostly I'm going to talk about AI. That's kind of what we've been immersed in the past year or so. I do think AI is bridging this huge gulf of execution. It is actually mind-blowing what you can do now. You can go from, any sort of data, not even structured, not even, a single source. You can extract from text, from tables, from existing charts. And then you can do that and extract a bunch of insights and messages and all the way to sort of crafting a very tailored message. Could be this very simple image here. And I can do that in really maybe 5 minutes. And I can create tons of those that are very different messages. I mean, if you look at this, I'm obviously not very good with Photoshop. I could never do something like this myself, even right? Maybe after, I don't know, I couldn't even create some of these texture of the wood or anything, right? It's not perfect, but it's so much better than what I could do just myself. I could never get to this level of polish. So what's interesting is I can create this one, which is, ingredients for pre-training large language models, or I can also kind of create, in the next 5 minutes, the same data with very different messages, which is, how much does it cost to actually train those models with these piles of coin? I can use AI to kind of get me ideas of metaphor or messages about the data. I can get AI to kind of craft the image itself and give it a style. The sort of leap that I make into crafting some of these images is kind of mind-blowing. So I wanted to reflect a little bit on what does that mean. So to me, it means two things. The first thing is it means a lot in terms of authoring, those type of sort of messages. So basically, I can take this one chart. So imagine that's just the sort of number of models kind of evolving over over the years, although, we stopped kind of last year counting those. But imagine I can take this and then I can craft in maybe, I think I did this following that you're going to see in the space of about an hour. I can sort of turn this into, something that would, for example, convey the emergence of new tech from, nothing, right? Maybe I can give it a little bit of a sci-fi look. Ooh, just, let's look toward the future. Or maybe I want to convey the message about, like how does that shape our civilization now, right? Maybe I can give it sort of some sort of inspiring message about reaching new heights, doing things we couldn't before, thanks to these models. Maybe I can turn it into a different style, right? Is it the dawn of civilization? Are we rebuilding or sort of, whole civilization with these AI models? Or is it more gloomy? Is there some sort of, unforeseen negative impact of all of those models that are emerging? Maybe I can explore some different metaphor, right? Going away from the sort of city and saying, well, things are growing, and maybe these are kind of also impacting our environment, right? Maybe I can give it a little bit of sense of mysterious thing. We don't know what's going to happen. Are we going to, what is going to happen with all of these things? Like how, we're in this kind of time where we don't know what's going to be the impact of that. And then we can play with just the general atmosphere, right? Making people feel sort of some of these emotions that are behind the message we want to get at. So, what you've seen here is really, I've created a lot of different messages, and then they each can convey very different emotion, which I think is really a core of telling stories, is have people sort of perceive your message and sort of that generate some sort of emotion, kind of, stay with you. And maybe as Benjamin wants to do, like push you to act in a different way, right? Because it's so disturbing or it's so exciting that from knowing this new thing, you want to do something with it, right? And so I think what we should think about is, we've been doing a lot of authoring tools, all of us in this call, to help people tell their story and make sure it's actually founded, into actual data and so on. I think we could think about how does that unlock to be able to craft 100 different messages and play with all of these different emotions. And can that actually lead to better storytelling, exploring all of this range of things you could say? The other side of things, and I think Jen Hopswell in the Discord talked about this. This is about the consumption. So, different people might want to consume stories differently. And so there's this comic I really loved. It made me really laugh at the beginning of the AI stuff. Which is, you have the author on one side, and it's like, AI can turn this single bullet point into a long email I can pretend I wrote. And then on the reading side or the consuming side, you have AI makes a single bullet point out of this long email I can pretend I read. And so to me, if you replace this by, sort of story, I think it unlocks very interesting things, right? Like here we are having people, crafting those amazing messages, and will people actually even read those? So I think the other question is, how people consume stories nowadays might actually be in their hands. So, what's our kind of, what's our strategy there? Is there a way we can craft stories that are so compelling people won't even want to sort of, summarize it or things like this? So now, to conclude, I think we should definitely rethink some fundamentals of what storytelling research is, what is sort of the ways to craft better stories and how people might consuming. And then we should really think about what AI can give us to do some of these, and sort of the pitfalls, but also how can we leverage those pitfalls to make them strengths. Right.
Yeah, thanks for a great talk and great time control. So I would see It's just when we shall stop, but yeah. Okay. So now let's come to the open discussion session. So I won't share the slides again, and I really found there are lots of questions coming into our Slido, and I won't use my own question. So maybe I can pick two questions first. One is from Bon Adriel. So they have some controversial thought realizations have been used to push harmful narratives in the past, and how should we prevent this? It is a little bit similar to another question. So, Fatim, I don't know if I read the name correct, and he would like to, they would like to ask, how should we include the voice that often unheard in our real storytelling? So I believe they are all about like the bias. So how would you consider like the bias in data story, and how should we try to mitigate it? I would say, yeah.
Well, this problem has been with us through the ages too. People have often written things that other groups of people have disagreed with and have taken it to real extremes and wars and genocide and all kinds of things that are horrendous. We've never had a solution for that. I don't think we're going to come with a solution for this. What we have tried to do is within our own education, train everyone to be critical thinkers, to actually challenge what they read and think seriously about whether, the foundations. I think that we are in a very dangerous time right now because of the disassociation between media and impact and fast, exciting change and content and evidence. And people are thinking that they can believe or not believe in things that there is actually evidence for. People are coming up with conspiracy theories, but I think that we must stop disassociating media messages from the science, the truth, the data. It needs to actually be together. But we can't control other people. Everybody will interpret things. The best we can do is try and educate other people.
Yeah, I rejoined that. I mean, it's interesting for the conspiracy theories. We saw a lot of postings on X as a result of like the hurricanes hit regarding the FEMA and how FEMA has funded, people outside and like immigrants and stuff and won't support well the US. So there's been a lot of misinformation. I recall in the past when I was trying to make sense of Hillary versus Trump stuff and the stories being told about each candidate, I was trying hard to find the actual real source and real data. What is this like a server mail thing? It was super hard. So regardless of the education, I think like, I believe, I hope I am educated and push for like my critical thinking. Who should I trust? I think it's increasingly hard also to just like even find the right data sources, the trustable data sources for where the stories come from. So yeah, I tend to agree, for lack of being very controversial with Sheila, that yeah, we need to education. We cannot control what people do, and it's yeah, I don't see like an easy solution or path for even trying to find what or make that original data or the truth like being actually really findable for the general public or even critical thinkers.
So I guess I'm a little bit more positive. And in fact, this, reminds me of a conversation I had a long time ago with Chris Collins. I don't know if he's around, but I remember it was the time of information overload. And he's like, oh, people a long time ago already talked about information overload, just as, because like we were inventing printing, for example, and people were like, oh my God, it's going to be information overload. And to me, this notion of bias, and there's like so much, sort of stories you can create from scratch, and they have no sort of evidence or, even source. In fact, that's been the problem all along. I mean, you can definitely craft a whole paper out of nothing. I could just fake the data and I can, go from there. Or so there's nothing really that helps people make sure the truth is the truth, right? And even the truth might be a sort of not an objective thing. People might have different truths. But the thing that I found actually pretty compelling is it is very easy now to make a lot of different versions, right? And in fact, I think that is very interesting. And I think someone in the chat, Xinshan, sort of note that, in that, you know, when you actually are able to look at 100 different stories and then 100 different interpretation of a data, that makes you actually think about, you know, what is the, you know, what aspect seems to be really sort of true or recurrent, and then which aspect may be a little bit sort of controversial. So I actually do think having this capability of having many different perspectives on a story, or maybe even access to many different data sets, maybe making it even easier to kind of compare some of these, right? Out of 100 stories that I've read on all of the news, what's common, what's different? I don't know, I feel like there might be some light there that in fact might be much easier to actually track down some of these. But I'm the positive thinker of the lot, maybe.
Yeah, I think, I mean, what always kind of bugs me a little bit with this term story is that it sounds a little bit passive. It's like you're being told something and then you may believe it or not believe it, but then there is a tradition of the story being passed on and it's kind of very crafted and so on and so. But what I think is we should move to like data conversations or something more, that the story is really just you know, one perspective, as Natalie says. So there are it's controversies. Is that the right term? So it's like a Q&A, and I think that's what I'm trying to do a little bit more, trying to think a bit, because the story is, you can tell something, but where is the interaction? Where is the reactions from the audience? If I'm sitting down with someone and discuss the latest data about, I don't know, hurricanes, then, you know, we have a conversation and they can correct me and we can look for more evidence. So I don't know how systems or AI can support that, but it would be cool, I guess, to do a bit more like that and get rid of this passiveness.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. So maybe let's come to the next question. So I noticed there are really lots of discussion on Discord. So maybe we can continue discussing this, like many controversial and interesting problems afterwards. So second question come from Matt. They ask, like, there are many research nowadays. They are motivated by professional data journalism, but nowadays the landscape of media industry has changed a lot. So they would like to ask, how can we as researchers support like local data journalism, or like I think it might be amateur data journalism. So how can we better support them? Yeah, that's the second question.
Is that our role as researcher, to support any sort of people? That's been a bit my philosophical question this past year, especially as I'm in a company, right? What actually is my role? I don't know. I think our role is to build some sort of unit of knowledge that we believe is sort of true, right? And in fact, I love Benjamin's provocation. You know, it's the art of telling story, even research. I think we've been really going around the evaluation sort of side of things, right? What really makes a big difference? You know, how do people even sort of, you know, apprehend stories, even want to look into it, want to engage in discussion? What is the sort of hook for it? What is the sort of story that stays with people? I mean, we've got a bunch of studies, but I think lots of them are controversial. Lots of them are really tied to the medium, like Fanny pointed out, that might be. So I feel like really, as researchers, maybe that's a good point of focus, which is, you know, how do we even assess the impact of some of these stories on people, and like what are some of the factors that are really contributing to impactful data, stories. And then we can turn that knowledge into insights for journalists who could hopefully use for the better, those effective ones, and for educators who can make sure if there is a factor that's very, sort of influencing you in a way, you're aware of it, or you have like method to mitigate it. So to me, researchers feel like, we need to kind of think about what are some of those human factors behind those techniques, and then how do we measure them, and then how do we sort of ensure we can communicate with the right people about those.
I would like to pick up on this communicate with the right people question, because I think one of our big dangers these days are recommender systems, where there's a tendency to only show a person what they agree with. So then they don't get, if you see, a cross sampling of everything in the whole world, then you see that not everybody agrees with you and you can still think openly about it. But if you're in these echo chambers and you only see what people who agree with you, you tend to think, well, of course I'm right. So I think that they are perhaps evil. That certainly what has been happening around them is very problematic. The other thing is, as much as, and I do use AI as a tool and all of the kind of stuff that Natalie talked about, like, having fun with it, but we have to be aware that AI is building on what currently is. And what currently is a very, it's a society just full of unconscious bias in all kinds, well, sometimes even conscious, but mostly in unconscious bias across gender, across race, across creed, across geography, across everything. And it's all in there, and it's unconscious, and so it's subtle. And so we have to really be careful if we use it, that we aren't propagating things. Like if you don't use it, if I even think for myself, how I think has changed a lot year by year. How I think changes because I'm looking at thinking, being aware of the world, aware of how the world is changing. But AI has to use what exists, data that already exists. So if it's using language models, it's with the previous bias, right? So we have to be careful that how we use it is not going to be propagating biases that we don't want to have part of.
In a way, that's how I understood Matt's questions about the local data journalism, right? That it's a little bit against the mainstream or the generalizable stuff, because I think in this notion of local, there is always a notion of ungeneralizability. So I don't know if that is what a comment to this, right? So if you give people the ability to look what's around them, the stuff, report on what they are micro experts or local experts, I think, and take it from there. And I think this is how I understand the question. So maybe the solution isn't the question, I think, that Matt is posing.
Yeah, maybe it's not telling stories. Like one point that the local aspect makes me think about is how to engage with the community, and pigging back to what Benjamin was saying, or the fact that it's very passive to being told a story. So maybe there's more potential in having data journalism, which is more like engaging in discussions and trying to see with the stakeholders, the community, party, and even the decision makers and whatnot. So it back to this question of it's a bias. I tell a story, it's my viewpoint, I tell it the way I want. It's not that discussion. And I think maybe that's one path forward, trying to make it more interactive, more turn taking, more discussion based. Because so far we can list the rules or the best practices we see from what people have done, and it's great. We have these rules, they are useful to think about what I can do. how I can bend these guidelines and things, and just do my own personal data journalism, because I don't want to be like everybody else. But beyond that, yeah, we can do the tools if we go to each and every of these data journalists and see their pain points, like the low-hanging fruit in HCI, right? But yeah, for deeper, like, more profound, thinking about the local journalism, I think it cannot go without engaging the stakeholders.
Yeah, nice. Thank you all. So our next question will be a little bit about evaluation. I saw two questions. The first question is from Junxiu. So how can we quantify how good the story is? How many page views and likes? And another question from Daniel is about can we really show how the evaluation metric itself works? So it's about evaluate the evaluation metric. So both are about evaluation. So I would like to ask you to share some opinion on how to evaluate the stories and whether these like metrics are effective. Yeah, thank you.
How do we do so for movies and books? Sales? I don't know. Clicks, likes, hits. I think maybe like it's nuanced. A story that I will like might not be a story that Sheila or Ben likes, and vice versa. So yeah, it's a little hard. Yeah,
I don't think we can evaluate stories in the same way that we evaluate something that has a purpose. A story is a communication, and actually, one of the hallmarks of a good communication is that different people will interpret it differently, right? I mean, so that I don't think there are the same kind of paths that we've done before. I think, like Fanny said, it's if it's a story, you're putting it out there like movies, like books, like who buys them, who sees them, who talks about them, how do they enter into the discussion, who is influenced by them, who writes something subsequently from them. It's real world impact we're looking for.
So I've been thinking a lot about stories in terms of different phases. And I think I echo again Jen Hoswell's in the chat, thinking, there's different stories good at different things or in different stages. So to me, for example, and we did this with Benjamin when we looked at sort of data comics or their appeal, right? Like we put them on the stand. One stand was in a festival. One stand was the comics. The other one was like more traditional stuff. Would people even notice it and then go check it out? To me, there's kind of stage one, right? If no one's like buying the book, then so you kind of need some of that. Then there is the stay with the story, right? So we know when you look at YouTube things, most people stop after 60 seconds or something like this, not even, I think. So there is almost like the hook. So you might get people to buy the book, but after the first page, they just put it down. Again, failure, unless there's really an interesting message in that first page, I guess. Then you have the sort of stay with the story and like be really sort of understanding each step of the story and like following the logic, for example. Then there is, are you sort of reconsidering your own point of view, or are you learning something new, which is another ballpark. I think it's kind of more like education type evaluation stuff. Then there is all the way to, will you remember the story? Will it stay with you? And then will it even impact sort of your actions, right? Or the way, can we estimate if it will change the way you behave, right? So like almost this literature of behavior change. And then I think the final thing is, will it even sort of encourage you to then sort of share that story with others and propagate it, right? So I mean, to me, it's such a long sort of life with lots of stages. And I can't really, in fact, the few stories I know that aren't about data that manage to do all of that, I still don't understand how they manage to do it, right? Like I'm still kind of puzzled. Feels a little bit like some sort of weird combination of of like a randomness. Somehow they end up there. So I feel like if we can think a little bit along those lines of each of these steps, maybe, and then sort of evaluate them from maybe in independently from each other, and then put them back together. I mean, maybe we have some hope, but we're talking, 10 years, and plus all of this might change, as my kids watch TikTok, and now it's okay to just be like, 10 seconds. You may just use like 20 times 10 seconds. So it's kind of changing the way the stories are sort of assimilated, right? So I don't know. I mean, it's like, to me, it's a community type discussion, and we should sort of step a little bit away from our next paper or novel storytelling thing, and like really sit down and look at what other communities have done in each of these different areas, and then, try to see if we can push this agenda.
Just want to add something, and Ben, I will let you speak. I will be short, just because Mara on the Discord has shared something that is very pertinent, I think. I think a story that is successful doesn't have necessarily to touch like a wide number of people. A very impactful story for just me and it's a life changer is as important as one story that impacts more people, perhaps in a more limited way. So thank you, Mara, for your comment. I think it's important to not count in numbers, but also like, how much that can make the difference, even if for one single person. So that would be success for me. Ben, sorry, I didn't want to hijack. We haven't heard your thoughts on this one.
Well, no, I don't think there's a lot I want to add. I think what I'm just thinking is that we always associate these stories and with like insights and conveying insights and information about the data and so on and so on. But I think it's a much more richer thing, right? It can be so. To me, stories, if I think of them in the widest sense, I think they are a tool to some extent to think about, or it's a kind of a blueprint methodology to think about something in the real world. So sorry, apologies for this bulky thing, but if you take any of your favorite fairy tales, right? They are a blueprint model, a methodology, how you may behave in certain situation or judge certain, behaviors and so on and so on. And I think with data stories, it might be the same, that we say, here is something that I learned about data. Yes, but I learned so many different things that help me engage with this topic, so that there is these data available and that they are not complete, that they're uncertain, that they're updating, like how the data is being collected, treated, analyzed, what people do with these data, you know what I mean? So I think there is so much more, and that's, as visualization researchers, we're mostly interested in the data itself and the visualizations, but I think we need to equally look at all these other things and how our stories can be these methodological blueprints to actually, say, empower people to act in certain situations eventually. I think call it decision making or whatever you want to call it, or these controversies, I think.
Thank you all. I really like your viewpoints of impact, or like impact even on a single person. I think that's really important for stories. And our next question might be about like the collaboration with other fields. There are two versions. The first one comes from Rebecca. So they asked, with the AI development in storytelling, do you see more need to collaborate with other storytellers, such as filmmakers, artists, and designers? And another from we also ask about how we can engage like potential audience into the narration creation process. I think it's really about bringing more instead of only like researchers and authors into our like community and research. Yeah. So I'm happy to see how you think about it.
I agree that I mean we have some mediums like books that tend to be written solo, where that's somebody, and there's the whole kind of myth about like locking yourself up and all being by yourself and writing a solo book. But we have other story media like film, which are created by a huge bunch of people with a whole bunch of different skills that they all bring together. Though usually there's, a much smaller set that have the overall vision. But I think that, yeah, we've just scratched the surface of how we can tell stories, how we want to replace our science in our stories so that they are like rich and full and informative, and that we may well need interdisciplinary teams. That we should welcome working in such teams. And I think there were some questions earlier about how do we bring other people's voices into this? I think, yes, bring them in as part of your team, right? Whoever is of interest, who owns the data, who the data is about, who the data is going to impact, all of those kind of people can have a role in figuring out how we want to tell stories. And I think that sometimes some of the concepts, like the science concepts that we want to communicate, are not simple. And so then there's a whole question about how you actually do that. And maybe you actually need to work closely, hand in hand with domain experts to actually make sure that the subtlety is in the story, is available in the story.
So what I've done in the past, which I found very fascinating, is in fact bring a couple of people in a field. I've done it with filmmakers, and then have them in a focus group sort of design a story together. And actually, it's really funny because they're all disagreeing. They have very specific point of view. But as an observer, I find it extremely interesting on how they disagree and like why they disagree. And I think it reveals a little bit like the metacognition or whatever, the meta process that they're following, right? So, for example, we brought them to create data videos, and like, some people argued for about 2 hours on the first frame. What's going to be the first frame? And so, to me, that changed the whole sort of point of view I had about data videos, for example, and then what do people care about? And in some ways, that's more about the art of story making, Fanny, rather than the medium itself, right? Like, in fact, what I got from it is, what's important is the first frame, not really what that first frame is. So I feel like, when you work with those people, it feels like having more being an observer of their debates in how to make the story as more insights than actually directly working with them to make stories. Because it's kind of hard to reflect back on, why some of these people make those choices. It's a little bit like if you work with a designer, you look at the result and you're like, wow, that's like a really good design. And then a different designer has a very good different design. And it is very hard to figure out what works, right? Maybe it's just the spacing or something like this. So anyway, that's my 10 cents answer. Just listen to people debate. Plus, it's really fun.
Yeah, I want to add things like a little bit more about the community who are mainly concerned with the story. So we have a history of failures in Walt Disney movies, for example, when they didn't actually engage the community of who they were telling the story of. And people from those community being offended by the stereotypes, being carried out and just communicated like, oh, okay, everybody does this and this, like in China, or everybody is a savage in the New World, or these kind of things, right? So I don't have a very good answer for how should we do that. I think it's very hard work, especially for those who need the most. So the people whose voices are not often heard, the people who don't come forward as easily, are the people probably who need the most, us to tell the story of, us being like whoever would be the narrator, or the people who master the craft, or like model that story so that it's most faithful to the people's story initially. So yeah, I think it's like it's a matter of like being comfortable with the idea of doing slow research, not racing after the next Sky deadline or the next Viz deadline, and taking the time to really engage meaningfully and deeply with the communities. It might require field work. It might require, getting out of your comfort lab zone and really, really try to engage. But it's not the typical regular, motion things that we are used to in most of the case, like posting an announcement on crowdsourcing or Facebook or whatever. Like it might require a little bit more than that for some of the stories who are more sensible or whose people are more difficult to get a hold on. And then even when you have a hold on them, it can be hard to tell one story. That makes people be uncomfortable in some situation, and that's also hard work. So I think, yeah, there's a big effort that we need to try to do in that sense. And I agree with what Natalie and Sheila were saying about multidisciplinary teams. That's I think is easier when people are willing to give the time to work with them, and we should definitely do that more. Knock at doors, send emails. That's something that can work.
What was the question again?
The question is how we can involve like outsiders or other stakeholders in those stories into our research or process. Yeah.
That was a rhetoric question, I think. No, sorry. No, I think it's multidisciplinarity. I mean, I wonder, what is our job again? What is our job as visualization researchers or HCI researchers in this? Like, storytelling is such a big field. We're not the only ones doing it, and other people's are way better than us, and we shouldn't put everything on our plate and should just be playing the role that we can do. What can we do best, right? How can we help the others? People write policy briefs, right? I don't know how to write a policy brief, and I'm never going to write one, but it's like, how can I support that person who's writing one in, I don't know, keeping visualizations as clear and brief and short or deep or transparent? Maybe that's what we can do.
Yeah.
I like the suggestion of addressing the list of provocation that Benjamin brought at the end of his talk.
Yeah, I think we do not really have time for doing so, but yeah, I would like to mention the first question by Ben. So yeah, he asked us about is storytelling really working? So I think maybe each of you can use like 1 or 2 sentences to answer this question. So maybe you can give us a hint of sense, and then we can continue our discussion in future. Yeah.
Well, I would say that we've got ourselves into trouble by thinking that there are right and wrong ways of telling stories. And I think that even in this panel, we have been talking like that there are right and wrong ways. And the questions here are talking about there being right and wrong ways, and how do we know if we've got it right? And actually, storytelling is like a human endeavor, has been a human endeavor for whatever, 40,000, 60,000 years, and has actually always done well with us as humans. But there are all kinds of voices in the traditional storytelling that we have just ignored. And we have made there being best practices for stories. And all of these get in the way now. We need to actually try and get back to our roots and tell real stories with real information that really matters with the people in the communities that it matters to.
That's very inspiring, Sheila. You just got us to think. We're just like bugged now. How do we get our roots?
Well,
no, I
mean,
like. Sorry, go ahead, Sheila.
Okay, first of all, we all have roots somewhere. But there are also people all around us who are not maybe part of, the mainstream work that we are doing, that will talk to us if we talk to them. There are communities around us that need avenues to talk about, what life is like for them, about how they are being ignored and marginalized, and there is there's actually, I think, so much we can do, but we have to be open to a broader community to try and actually, offer our paltry little skills in trying to help them get their stories out.
Yeah, I wanted
And
to
that's
react
been,
to what you said about like the right versus wrong way of telling a story. That's true. Like it's getting back to what Natalie was saying. There's million ways, and why should we shut down column? That's my take. That I'm maybe angry at, like, I don't know, bike lanes. Why not? And is it right or wrong to say so? It's my belief. So why? Like, I'm a biker. I like bike lanes, but you know, like it's interesting to have these different like viewpoints. It's important to keep them on, not only to make the silent voices heard, but yeah, I think it's healthy actually to have these different viewpoints. That's what made me actually question, like, is that story true? Because I see two versions of it. Which one should I believe, or should I think about, or resonates with me and whatever? So I think, yeah, it's important to even, like, you know, I don't
so
know.
I'll tell you a story that I told on Sunday morning. That actually, so I was going actually to my very first conference talk, to give my very first talk, which back in those days was like pretty mathematical. And it just happened, I was in the south of Germany and I was on a train, and a person came in and sat down opposite me and talked to me about what they were doing. And they told me all kinds of things that still resonate with me. And one is they talked about how in the 1500s, when the printing press came around, that, the patriarchy had control of it, and that they thought that there were kinds of stories that they liked better. And they tended to be stories about heroes and about action and about killing and, having, rising excitements and climax and all of that kind of stuff. And I know that when I was in grade school and high school and I was being taught to write stories, I thought, this is not for me, because I don't want to write these stories about bashing and killing and stuff. And like, it just made me feel like, blah, So I thought, I can do other things. I can do math. I can do visuals. I'll stay with that, which is how I ended up in visualization, right? But, and you should get this little book written by Ursula Le Guin, which is called The Carrier Bag Theory of Fiction. And she talked about all of her troubles exactly with this same problem, that she felt alienated from the right way to tell a story, which I had been told over and over again in high school, that was how a story should be. So therefore my stories were not good, right? But actually, there are many ways of telling stories, and many different cultures still have other ways of telling stories. And I am at this point busily trying to find examples and structures of different kinds of storytelling that do exist. And I think we need to explore the diversity and variety that can be storytelling. We need to find the communities that we can help give voice to their stories. We can, see and explore and even invent new storytelling structures. And let's see how we want to tell stories. And at this point, we have a lot of super exciting and very subtle science and data that we would like to interestingly and compellingly embed in stories. So I think we have a huge challenge, and a challenge that can be very rewarding. I mean, if you can actually tell a concept about latent heat and have an 8-year-old understand it, then it's kind of like a triumph, right? So we just need to work at it. I mean, to me, I think there is lots to be done, and it is not easy, but it can be rewarding.
I think it's the perfect conclusion.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think we can just skip the conclusion remark session. Yeah, actually, we still have like 2 minutes. I think we only have 2 minutes left. So maybe we won't take a new question. And yeah, I would like to thank you all for being here, and thanks for all the audiences for the really, really hot discussion. And I know like there will be some other panels in the room afterwards. So I would like to mention we have a dedicated channel for our panel. So if you like to discuss more, I think we can move to that channel, and also it can keep our records there. So yeah, thank you again for being here, and have a good day or have a good night. So yeah, really,
I also
thanks a lot. Yeah.
would like to thank all of the people in Discord. There is some fabulous
Yeah.
and interesting comments. There's masses of stuff happening in there. Thank you all very much.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Yes, amazing discussions.
Yeah. Thank you. So see you next time. Yeah.
Cheers. Have a nice
Thank you.
conference.